Oli here, and this is my review of The Time Monster, the fifth and final story of the ninth season of classic Doctor Who, starring John Pertwee as the Third Doctor. The Time Monster is the 64th story overall. It's 6 episodes long and is written by Robert Sloman. The Time Monster is as follows. The Master is back. Assuming the alias of Professor Fascalos at the Newton Research Unit at Cambridge University, he harbors his latest deadly plot to seize control of time itself. Can the Doctor and Joe thwart his terrible plan? What secrets do the mysterious trident-shaped crystal hold? Why is the ancient city of Atlantis central to the Master's plan? And what mythical terror lies at the heart of the maze? With time literally against them, the odds might be too great for the time travelers. So that is the plot for The Time Monster. The Time Monster is one of those stories that is actually considered to be one of the worst of the John Pertwee era, if not the worst story ever, but I would have to disagree to some extent. The Time Monster is an enjoyable story in a way, but at the same time, it's actually my least favorite of this season. But it's still an enjoyable, possible story in my opinion. The Time Monster was rather decent. I like the set of this story, and especially the Atlantis set. It looked very Greek and very mythological. And I like the labyrinth where Joe saw the Minotaur and where the Doctor also fought the Minotaur as well. That scene itself was actually quite impressive. I like the Doctor's new TARDIS interior with the sync balls as the round doors. It looked pretty cool, to say the least, and I wish it did come back for season 10, but at the same time, if it came back, we wouldn't have gotten the season 10 and interior, which is actually one of my favorites. The costumes look great, especially with Joe's Atlantean frock, and but not and the other costumes of Atlantis as well, and but not so much the Kronos costume or prop or whatever. I like the visuals of the story, even though the big Kronos flying towards the screen looked a bit silly. It did look impressive at the same time, and I liked the final moments of the story when the Doctor, the Master, and Joe were talking to Kronos, who had taken the form of a woman in this void place after Joe activated the time ram, which probably would have killed all three of them in the TARDIS. The script was okay, but it does have some very questionable moments and very sexually driven dialogue, especially Tom Tit, and how Tit was actually emphasized. As when I think in episode one, the Brigadier was telling the Doctor Joe, and I think Yates was there as well, and the Brigadier said Tom Tit, and then Yates was like, Tom Tit, what on earth is Tom Tit? And they pretty much emphasized the tit part in Tom Tit. Like, come on, there are children watching this. So it was actually rather interesting, especially with the Master returning and wanting to tame Kronos to gain control of time for himself. And it was nice to see Atlantis again after it was destroyed in the Underwater Menace. And of course, Atlantis was destroyed in the Underwater Menace as well, and it was destroyed in this story as well. The pacing was good up to the parts of Atlantis, but the story had a good conclusion overall. The moments of the story were rather good. I liked the cliffhangers for episode 3 and episode 4. In episode 3, I think Yates was in a helicopter, and then I think he was seemingly blown up by a doodlebug plane from the Germans that they used in World War II. And episode four's cliffhanger was the Doctor. He looked like he was devoured by Kronos, and then the Master sent the Doctor's TARDIS deep into the time vortex with Joe inside the TARDIS. I think that was probably the highlight of this story as well. So on to the performances of our main cast. John Pertwee, he was rather good in this story, and I think he definitely did the best with what he was given. I like the scene when he and Joe are in the TARDIS and when the Doctor was speaking to the Master through the time scanner. I think the Master like fiddled around with the audio and made the Doctor look like he was talking backwards. That was a pretty funny scene, and we also get a touching scene in episode 6 as well, when the Doctor and Joe were in the Atlantean prison cell, and then the Doctor was telling Joe about the meaning of life, or how he discovered the meaning of life when he was speaking to a hermit when he was a youngster in Gallifrey. And obviously followed by the Doctor apologizing to Joe by bringing her to Atlantis. It was a very touching scene, and John Pertwee and Katie Manning did that scene wonders. Speaking of Katie Manning, she was great as Jo as well. She does get quite a bit to do in this story. I like the bit where she jumped on the master's back when not Thanos, Kronos was loose in Atlantis, and then the master was trying to escape, and Joe pretty much jumped on his back, and then she obviously ended up in the master's TARDIS. This and how she actually does save the day when Joe activates the time worm, and when she was in his TARDIS and the Doctor was in his own TARDIS, and that would have probably killed all of them, but Kronos actually came and saved them at the end of the day, and I actually quite like that. The Brigadier returns for the after last seeing him in Day of the Daleks, and Nicholas Courtney did a good job. He didn't really have much to do, but he did get some good dialogue, and considering the fact that he and the rest of UNIT was frozen in space time thanks to the Master for like the last 3 episodes. Benton and Yates did great as well. They actually did play a part in this story as well, and Benton, before he was turned into a baby by Tomtit, and he was able to figure out that the master was pretending to be the bigger brigadier and tried to ambush him, and he almost actually succeeded, but then the master being the master, he actually managed to outsmart Benton, and then and as I mentioned before, Benton got turned into a baby by Tomtit, and then Stuart Hyde and Dr. Ruth Ingram pretty much had to take care of baby Benton until the work was done, and obviously when the work was done, Benton returns to an adult and he was pretty much naked in front of everyone else. That was pretty amusing. And also, Yates, he did actually play a part in this story when he was helping units fight the old Earth soldiers that the Master was summoning through Tomtet. It was definitely nice to see units again after the focus was taken away from them for most of the season, and it was definitely nice to see the unit family utilized well in this story. The cast of characters, they were interesting in a way, and they were all quite good. So to start off, one of our first side characters was Dr. Ruth Ingram. She was the scientist that helped the Master create Tomtit. And obviously she was a feminist, and she was obviously annoyed by the Master's condescending attitude in a way. She was an okay character, even though her character was basically a bit of an iteration of your stereotypical male hating feminist, and it did seem that she was rather fond of Stuart Hyde. I think remember the scene when I think they're operating Tomtit and it worked, and then they were like jumping around all over the place, holding each other, saying, "We done it, we done it, we done it, we done it." And that was also another funny scene as well. Speaking of Stuart Hyde, we have Stuart Hyde. He was Ingram's assistant, and Kronos pretty much fed on his timeline, which pretty much aged him to the point of near death. But the Doctor does help him get better, and after that, he and Ingram pretty much just look after baby Benton. Crassus, he was the High Priest of Atlantis, and the Master actually brought him forward into the 1970s. He worked in cahoots with the Master and actually was convinced that the Doctor and Joe were enemies of the Master, and he died when Atlantis was destroyed. And to be honest, I was actually rather glad when he died because I actually find his character rather annoying. Then we had Dalios. He was the king of Atlantis, and he knew that the crystal of Kronos would actually destroy Atlantis, and he was able to resist the Master's hypnosis. That was actually quite cool. But then he was later usurped by the Master and his wife Galilea, and the Master obviously became king of Atlantis, and then obviously Dalios died, which Galilea wasn't really happy about because the Master had promised her that he wouldn't come into any harm of some form. So obviously Galilea distrusted the Master after that. Speaking of Galilea, we have Galilea. She was the queen of Atlantis and the wife of Dalios. She got tired of Dalios and wanted to throw him out, and with the help of the Master. Obviously, when he died, she wasn't really happy about that, and distrusted the Master. She was an interesting character with cleavage that would pretty much distract the viewers, and the higher ups knew what they were doing with Ingrid Pitt. She was also the first character to fall in love with the Master, and she obviously dies when Atlantis was destroyed as well. And we have Kronos. It was a creature that is basically from outside time itself, and it was very dangerous, out of control. The Master summoned it from its crystal, of when it was trapped in, and then was responsible for the destruction of Atlantis. And Kronos takes form of a woman when Atlantis was destroyed and frees the Master on request of, as per the request of the Doctor. Then obviously the Master uses the opportunity to escape from Kronos, and the Doctor and Joe were able to return back to not Unit, well, to Cambridge. So our villain, we obviously have the Master returning. This isn't Delgado's finest hour, but he does do a good job of what he was given. He is definitely a bit more camp than he was here than he was in any other stories, and the Master was pretending to be someone called Professor Thascalos or Thascales, or I don't know how it's pronunciated. I think I saw on Twitter it was Thascalos, and the DVD says it's Thascales, but potato. I mean, he was. I mean, yeah, Delgado did a good job of his with the Master in this story, and it's a shame that he wasn't as threatening in this story as he was in other stories, and that was a bit sad. And this is also Delgado's penultimate story as the Master. He returns in season 10's Frontier in Space, and this is his unintended final appearance before his untimely passing shortly after that story aired. As I have with the Time Monster, obviously the stories, as I mentioned before, the pacing of this story was good. I was hooked on the plot until they reached Atlantis, and the Atlantis part of the story really dragged, and I found it really boring. And I think they probably could have merged episodes 5 and 6 together, because obviously with the removal of some parts, because it was just boring, especially in episode 5 and some of episode 6 as well. I just no. And obviously, I do think the story has some very distracting plus unnecessary innuendos plus some very odd sexual content, such as Tom Tit, a naked Benton, and Galilea's cleavage. I did think the sexual fan service was turned up a bit when it didn't really need to. So to conclude this review, The Time Monster is an interesting story, but with strange plot elements and a laggy turning point when they reached Atlantis, and I give this story a 7 out of 10. So that's it for the reviews of season 9. Join me next time as I rank all 5 stories of this season. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already, and please let me know your thoughts to this review and the Time Monster itself. Until then, see you later.